And we are live.
All right, good evening, good Friday evening to all our friends and listeners. Welcome to the fresh edition of Dynamic CISO LinkedIn Live show. I must say the time for this particular LinkedIn Live couldn't have been more opportune. October, as we know, is celebrated as the Cybersecurity Awareness Month. Um, Although it's a very American concept, however, the awareness spans beyond the borders of America, and we are all collectively taking responsibility of spreading more awareness around key issues of cybersecurity. Now, before I bring in my esteemed guest for today's session, I would like to spend a minute and a half to just give you some context of what we are going to talk about and how our conversation will build upon. Nearly 3/4 of on the way through 2021, I think it is a good time to take some stock on the state of cybersecurity and lessons learned in the past few years. Nothing new in knowing that. Nothing new about the fact that attacks are on the rise and threat actors are seizing the opportunity. They are causing disruption in that industry. Also, they took advantage of this period of pandemic. Um, Information security professionals, when spoken to, I personally spoke to a lot of them and got to understand where is the biggest trouble and where are they facing the biggest fire. So in terms of um, not in any order of priority, but distributed denial of service attacks continue to dominate, continue to bother. Unpatched systems, that's completely human, but that also is a great botheration. Ransomware is the new smash and grab of cybercrime. APTs continue to dominate, and so does social engineering. So if I say that attackers will continue to go after the low-hanging fruits, it won't be any exaggeration. Companies, however, will need to take a very serious look at how they plan cybersecurity in their organizations. And second important thing is that how they look at the vendors they work with and what accesses and monitoring purposes they are using for their internal resources. Um, Again, digital supply chain will become more vital as we have seen what happened in some of the supply chain attacks in the past 1 year. Um, However, it's not as gloomy a situation as I have presented. Uh, Even though the breaches continue to occur, cybersecurity technology and practices are continuing to evolve to sufficiently protect against the many forms and different vectors of cyber attacks. Organizations are keeping pace with the advancement in technology, advancement in processes, and therefore we should not lose hope. I'm sure nobody is losing hope. So to talk about many such issues, I have the pleasure of having with me Avinash Prasad, a very seasoned cybersecurity expert and industry leader. Avinash currently works as the Vice President and Head of Managed Security Services at Tata Communications. Welcome, Avinash. How are you doing?
Thank you, Rahul, and thanks for the warm welcome. It's good while we're kind of getting a little bit from the V2P, which is the virtual to the physical mode now, and looking forward to some of that as well. But, very glad to be having this virtual tete-a-tete with you. Look forward to, being able to generate some insights for ourselves as well as share it with the
Absolutely.
viewers. It has been indeed a busy year for us in the trenches in cybersecurity.
Absolutely, I can understand. If one type of professionals who were both very occupied and on tenterhooks, I think within the realm of IT, It was the cybersecurity professionals, both at the producing end and the receiving end. So let's dive in. And to begin with, I would simply like to ask you, what's the big transition that you have witnessed or you are witnessing as far as cybersecurity is concerned? If I may also extend this question a little bit, what are the top concerns of a CIO, of a CEO, and of a board?
Yeah. So what I would like to do is, as you were starting off the session and the talk, you talked about the fact that there's more going on in cybersecurity, but which is the same to what we have seen. So indeed, as borrowing on what the French novelist Jean-Baptiste said, right, the more things change, the more they stay the same. Now, truly in cybersecurity, it is kind of a situation like that. That the threat actors are there. The way attacks are happening, it can increase. What happens to an enterprise, unfortunately, in case the attack is successful, is the same. So it is kind of that balancing act that is going on, and one needs to look at that. However, if you were to talk about some key transitions still, right, in this context, and tied back to management expectations of the enterprise, thinking of the resilient enterprise, right? So there were some of the big shifts that I have observed and would like to share is number one is the remodeling of the security architecture around the distributed enterprise. So that goes without saying that it immediately kind of attracted the attention in the aftermath, just a few months after the pandemic situation, that what does the secure remote workplace look like, right? What does the distributed enterprise look like, right? And for sure, that did not mean that the enterprise could just flip the security architecture and say that, there you go, we are ready for this. And of course, the other question was, how long are we going to stay like this? What if we come back, right? So because of that, remodeling the security architecture had to be a kind of a graded exercise, right? And there was a fair amount of thought going in from the CIO office, the CISO office also, in terms of how to approach this subject and plan the organizational model for that. There were some changes that needed to be made in terms of this moving away from the traditional deployment of certain security tools and technologies, which were not going to serve the purpose in the new model. And therefore, a notion and a concept that kind of came up in 2010, if I believe Forrester wrote about zero trust first, is something that you clearly saw resurgence in terms of the architecture of, pardon me for the noise, hopefully it'll just go about 30 seconds. In terms of the resurgence of the thinking around the zero trust architecture. And that is truly something that had to do with the thinking around users, devices, entities, workloads, anywhere. So that is really, the key aspect that was kind of coming up. So I think that was an interesting challenge and also a key step up that was needed from a transition standpoint. From the other aspect, I would say that it clearly went into, shifting more and more towards analytics-based approach. That's one of the other things that I saw, which meant that a better understanding. You spoke about, for example, ransomware attacks. You spoke about DDoS attacks, right? And within that, the unknown variants are the ones which cause the biggest problem for an enterprise. So it's analytics which really helps you to kind of find your way when there's such a, these unknown attacks really start playing at your enterprise. So that is something that I would feel was another key, acceleration, I would say, that has happened over there, where just looking at behavioral anomalies, looking at certain other drivers beyond your rules is what security needed to be modeled around, and that's what happened this year.
Okay, sorry.
Back to you, Rahul.
I thought you were about to say something more. However, I was actually keenly taking some notes when you were speaking. You began with the fact that remodeling of security architecture amidst the distributed enterprise needs to be looked at seriously. It's a graded exercise, sure, but the changes need to be made according to the changed paradigms, changed situations, changed workplace. Um, there is a visible, I would say, visible shift, at least from a thought process point of view, towards zero trust. I don't know how much of it is real on ground. Um, Whenever we talk about, for example, cloud technologies, while talking in theoretical terms, people are all gung-ho about it, but when you ask them, with what is happening within their organization, they take a couple of steps back and always say that, oh, okay, we are contemplating cloud because we have a large technology debt in terms of on-prem infrastructure. We can't, just get rid of it. But in terms of security and zero trust, I think that's not the case. And also you spoke about shifting more towards an analytics-based approach. Now, before I move on to my question that I have prepared, may I ask you, certain elements of remodeling, and also given the fact that we haven't had that kind of experience that that the boards and the organizations across sectors, and sorry, I'm not making a generic statement, but the majority of cybersecurity hasn't been there. So shifting towards an analytics based approach, or going on to remodeling of the security architecture, may sound a little too ambitious, isn't it?
Well, the obviously the ideation, starts at a certain stage, and then there's an implementation behind that. The implementation could also be based on some kind of a MVP thinking. Let's do the minimum viable right now, and let's go on from there. But the fact is that remodeling the architecture, and as I said, the alignment of that with zero trust based thinking can truly be the way in which it could serve the goals of handling your remote workers, giving a lot of flexibility to what the uh, enterprise working model of tomorrow looks like, assessing the supply chain risks, and handle that big kind of gorilla in the room that has also come in. So it's clear that most enterprises understand that there are benefits to be derived. So nobody's questioning that, right? Implementation approach, how to model it, how does their current identity and access model play into that, right? How do they manage the variety of devices and assets that are there across the enterprise? So those questions are there. There are real questions around because that has an implication on IT operations, that has an implication on future technology refresh cycles, how applications teams have been presently providing identity and access, and consuming that. So that is understood, but now kind of security has to come into those conversations and has to sit within that to be able to help craft this model. One could start with certain type of users, certain use cases that makes maximum sense to begin with, right? For sure, let's say remote users accessing cloud-based applications, but reasonably sensitive enterprise applications. That could be an important use case that one could definitely look at and say that, okay, what's the cloud security model that it's obvious that it has to be an internet and cloud-based security model for this. It cannot be an enterprise security model at all. Yep. So in which case, how do you model it around those type of users, their access mechanism, what are those devices and endpoints that they come in from, and the type of applications and transactions that they're executing. And that's when the whole thinking around protecting them starts coming in. Everything from, as I said, understanding the user behavior, pointing them internet security, looking at man in the middle, looking at data security around the application also. So I think very much, the thinking is there. There could be a use case based, adoption or some of those approaches is something that we are seeing. So I feel confident that it's going to take off for sure.
No, sure. So another, I mean, I'm getting a little curious by way of your speech and your answers. So my questions are now coming from those conversations. So you rightly mentioned that remote users accessing cloud-based applications from not so. I mean, there was a corporate VPN provided, but in many cases the internet was also insecure. And that required, I mean, that is the remodeling which we are talking about. One type of it, I mean, how to create an access mechanism, how to deal with the man in the middle. Did you come across any such example? I mean, without naming the organization or people, if you can tell us that somebody came with an full of anxiety that something is going wrong in my organization. Can you please help me in putting it together?
Yeah. What we noticed clearly was, number one is these questions kind of popped up naturally when customers started seriously talking about transforming their network approach, and where they started going from more traditional WAN to, because traditional WAN won't cater to the use case that we just spoke about, right? Because it won't make sense for you to get user to the branch, get user into data center, then get them again to break out onto the internet and go and traverse onto the application, etc. So clearly, organization started thinking of remodeling and transforming the network and the access, especially in a globally distributed enterprise that for sure is even more challenging, because you've got your India business, you've got some footprint in Europe, there could be something sitting in ASEAN, etc., etc. So obviously the question started coming in that based on your operational model and what your users are going to do, and what application do they need to work on. Once this transformation was being thought of, and more that they're thinking about overlay. People don't want to worry about the basic infrastructure. Nobody wants to worry about bare metal. Nobody wants to worry about the pipes anymore. It's all software defined. That's where it is going. So therefore, it is not about the plumbing. It is not about the infra. It is about the overlay. Can I get intelligently route my traffic from here to there? As and when you do that, is when you need to start talking about, okay, how am I going to secure this, right? Whether this securing the traffic means that do I need to do just internet-based content filtering? Do I need to do just the blacklisted sites protection from there? Do I need to start doing more malware inspection inline? As we see, users accessing something, the return traffic coming in. What could be going on over there? Implementing enhanced controls these days, more and more is coming in of what is called remote browser or cloud-based browser, because the browser is most of the time the carrier, right? Where your malware downloads, etc., can happen, your drive-by downloads can happen, and then suddenly you find your system is carrying infections. So through a remote browser, secure browser, secured environment, those infections can't hit you so easily. How do you start looking at all of that? So naturally, when the transformation thought came up that okay, we need to go with a very overlay-driven, software-driven approach, and let's intelligently route traffic from the user to the application, most optimal path. Then security has to be in that path. So that's one requirement, right? Very clearly, which started coming up, and okay, to be candid, we had more international customers talking about it, but definitely there were Indian customers also who were looking seriously at the, let's say, SD-WAN deployments. So therefore, what would they look at? And the second scenario that I would say very clearly is that organizations that needed to or wanted to go to BYOD in a big way, again, they had to definitely look at this use case, because how would they enhance the controls around the devices and the endpoints that now they have to allow access to, right? As the users would carry out their tasks, etc. So we saw some of these kind of drivers coming in. The minute these drivers came in, the important layers for that an interpretation of that use case for what security is needed over there, right? And I talked about a few things, right? Which could be firewall on the cloud, which could be sandboxing and malware inspection on the cloud, which could be better device validation, endpoint validation. What does your agent tell you about what the entity health of the entity is before you allow it to start accessing certain important assets and application and data. So that's where kind of the whole requirement became drivers towards implementation of this. And I think that would be what will kind of carry forward the success also of these projects.
Yeah. So, Avinash, we spoke about the shift, the transition, and also spoke certain ground realities, what you witnessed within the organizations. However, while most organizations would desire to move to a very comprehensive cybersecurity strategy, as I said, theoretically, nobody will oppose to this idea of having a robust cybersecurity. Even, I mean, the most conventional organizations are now asking for a better posture when it comes to cybersecurity, but they have reservations to invest. I mean, they need the best of the world, best of products and technologies. However, there's a reservation in terms of investing appropriately. So, there's a dilemma. So how can this dilemma of buying quality versus paying less? I mean, there's a dichotomy, and this dichotomy always results in, going for a mediocre solution, going for mediocrity in terms of approach. How can this be addressed?
Right. So there has always been this little bit of balancing act, and the CISO has been, excuse me, quandary in terms of how to make the strong business case for the projects, for their programs, and their investments. And that has been interpreted by some of the experts and analysts in the field also as how do you model return on security investment? How do you look at ROSI? Because it's not a straightforward ROI, and it can't be right, because you would better be safe than sorry. So, but then because if you're safe, then those costs don't show up. When those costs don't show up, then you feel cheated. That why did I spend so much on my security? So it's that classic quandary, which kind of is there. Having said that, ROSI is still, clearly evolving. There are methods and metrics that point towards security maturity, without a big blown incident being the only way to kind of realize the severity of your situation. And that's one, kind of a path that is being set by more and more security leaders that can, in a reasonable manner, show to my organization and my stakeholders that on these four areas, let's say we have matured, okay, and that could be just through, some of those simple things like, can we get, let's say, talk about data security, right? So can we put in reasonable classification around our data, okay, so that we, and at least at the outset, know that what is more sensitive, what is less sensitive. It's not just a data sprawl, everything is everywhere. And, when you lose something, you don't know. Secondly, bring in advanced solutions, bring in DLP, bring in DRM, but at the same time, start tuning. How do you use it within your organization? These can be very, especially DLP can be a very noisy solution as well, and it can create challenges for the organization. But once you start tuning that, then it gets better at finding the needle in the haystack, because as when data loss or data breaches happen, and reduce also, but at the same time brings down the user anxiety and frustration also at just getting constantly so many alerts saying that you sent something and that's invalid or that's inappropriate, etc. So that is something that that we see. So what that is leading to is, a more, let's say, a organization that is more constant, conscious and aware. You talked about the cybersecurity awareness month, so it seeps into the organization that we are aware of. I'm classifying this data. What am I doing with it? How am I using it? Right? What kind of last time did a DLP alarm got generated because I sent something or I did something? So how do I handle this better? So that is one thing in which you clearly start seeing graded improvement. So these solutions therefore start showing better performance against certain KPIs, right? Those KPIs could be uh, overall, both including false positives, the supposed data sensitive data related alarms, right? Data loss related alarms. How many did you get in the organization? The organizational engagement around basic understanding of from the initial skepticism to the fact that there is some level of buy-in and they understand that this is the way we need to classify and we need to protect our data. So those are the methods, mechanisms in which one looks at that. That helps flip the story around the fact that otherwise there was this, way of still pitching it to the board by using the FUD tactic, by talking about the biggest breach of the month or the week or whatever else, right? But that is sometimes not appreciated in the corporate environment. But that's also the truth. That's also the truth that reactive and spending in hindsight, is something then you will definitely spend more, and there will be no questions asked. You will have to spend that. Versus, proactively, if you spend that money, you would probably end up. Ransomware is a classic example. After that, there is no control in terms of what you will have to spend, right?
Absolutely.
Versus what you would have done earlier. So that is the other example. So FUD doesn't really go away. I'm using the term loosely. FUD, I don't really mean that one is trying to, go and pitch the fear, uncertainty, doubt, or plant it in management's mind. But that's the second part of it. So I would say it's the thinking around ROSI. There's some maturing which is happening around that. Is being able to model it to at least certain organizational KPIs and make it real for both users and they're getting their engagement as well as the senior management in terms of what is there, and appropriately also talk about the costs of the reactive approach towards security versus the proactive spending on security, right? So these are the things I think that I believe are building up the case in a better manner, and that phase model and that step up in maturity is a journey which really empowers both the CISO as well as the CIO to face the other stakeholders.
No, I'm sure, and if I'm allowed to make a few observations here and make a couple of comments, basis my understanding of how even the investment in technology, from a cost center to becoming, an organizational or business advantage, how it has progressed. I think the same level of thinking should be now allowed to be done for information security as well. There was a time, you and I both have witnessed, there was a time that a very minuscule percentage of technology budget was signed off as information security expenditure. Now, I think we are out of the clutch of that cliched thinking that, within IT, we have a small budget given to information security. So with the kind of as you rightly said, that a lot of incidents have led to consciousness and more awareness right from the top to bottom, and you know compliances, for example, organizations which have to follow compliances have no escape from this. They have to be at a maturity level where either their customers approve that, their boards approve that, or the statutory body approves it. So I think
Right.
the whole industry has to walk a mile more to come up to that speed, and leave those inhibitions that while you are aspiring for quality, but you are not ready to pay for it. So, and you use the word FUD. I think it was in the right context. It was not out of context. So, the newer models of cybersecurity all are pointing towards a very flexible, a very agile, service-oriented approach. uh, time is not very far when this also will be driven by a catalog, I'm sure. So how can this transition to a new ecosystem going to take place? Because according to me, it has to actually leapfrog a lot.
Yeah, the traditional model was, of course, uh, deploying, kind of this, deploying these different blocks of, solutions which would add up to your cybersecurity, those big walls, the edifice of, what protects your fort. But of course, that is changing. As you said, there's flexibility and agility, which is kind of also coming into this approach. I think, we have seen, and now we can learn a lot from also the cloud migration and cloud adoption journey of enterprises, right? Uh, Therefore, the fact that everything across the entire stack, right, from infrastructure layer to platform layer to the application layer, the and now even functions, various kinds of business functions, etc. Everything is available as a service, and adoption is rapidly continues to grow. So that's point number one. Point number two is this is a really discussion which popped up just a few years back, that when one looks at the security landscape of what customers would buy, especially on the technology side, right? How much of it would get dominated by the CSPs, the cloud service providers? And there was a clear trend being seen there, that security buying, instead of being from your traditional sources, is gradually shifting and moving towards buying it from from your cloud service provider, who's also providing you compute, who's also providing you platforms slash software. Now, further that got accelerated because of the thought process around containers, now the thought process around serverless computing, etc., which is all coming. So, if one was to think that we can extract more juice out of traditional security investments, yes, possibly some of that can be done. Can it apply to these scenarios that we just spoke about? It can't, right? So, that's kind of one of the big questions, that is there. That given that very clearly that the migration journey is on, the cloud adoption journey is on, how is security going to look at that? So that means that the whole thinking around the appropriate security architecture and strategy for the cloud model is kind of mandatory and necessary, not something which is optional. Of course, in certain regulated industries, there's still some limited adoption, and we respect that for BFSI because for obvious reasons. But otherwise, this shift and the transition to the new security ecosystem. So those kind of are the very clear drivers that I spoke about, right?
Yes.
So what that means is that the notion of this the pivot points for the security controls. An architecture would be built around what are those pivot points for security controls, whether it be a control around your data, control around your users and identity, right? Controls around your internet access, or all the other such relevant points. So those pivot points are also now more and more cloud-based, right? Because if your identities are getting consumed from cloud-based sources itself, right? So that needs to be thought of from that standpoint. Clearly, infrastructure, we can see that how what is the kind of growth in IaaS. So infrastructure is getting consumed from the cloud. So therefore, the security models had to kind of shift towards that. That also led to some interesting solutions, kind of coming up. Let's say like an interesting solution that we recently worked on is around cloud workload protection, which thinks of security not as a which is thinks of security for an asset, not in terms of either, let's say, the server and its OS. Doesn't think of it as server and OS plus some database or something which is there. That plus applications, or all of that package as a container which can just be moved around, deployed, redeployed, or done anything like that. Can you think of everything, all of these layers like that, right? Then security has to be very different approach which flows top down. It cannot be trying to secure every layer individually. so that this whole bubble, if you will, right? If that's how it is tagged up on the cloud, then we need to be protect everything. Whereas earlier, these things are being protected individually. All these layers meant that you had your security for your endpoints and hosts, you had your security for your applications which are separate, security for your database, and security for your network, etc., etc. Right? So so that is where I think the shift is happening. There's this cloud environment, and then there is this approach towards how can we make it work from a security as a service perspective.
Yes.
So and the functional evolution also of some a solution that can uh, kind of ingrained within, which is more layers of thinking of it as one sensitive workload, which is kind of can move around, and I need to protect that work, right? So it is not about that VM, because that VM is there today, can be gone tomorrow,
Yep.
right? So if I'm able to think of that workload and I'm able to protect that, and that's where some of these innovative approaches have come in, as I said, of CWP, which is a cloud workload protection approach. So and that ties in well with our thinking and our approach also in terms of looking at the cloud, looking at security, and then looking at protecting that. So that's kind of one example I would like to point out over there. The other thing, of course, is the fact that how does the customer get assurance around what kind of the SLAs are they getting out of their security solutions, right? That is something that usually is a pretty difficult answer to give if you are going with your traditional more of on-prem deployment model, right? But if one was to look at SLAs and KPIs that you're getting from a security, then being able to tie it to a service-oriented approach is going to be always going to be a more effective way, because that's something that you can ask for from the date of deployment itself, right? And that is something also from an improvement standpoint one can track. But with more of a inward kind of a solution approach, it is usually we found that every environment that we've gone into, a brownfield environment where we've looked at security solutions that were running, we first thing that we find is there's inadequate data to even find out what kind of security issues are going on, what were the kinds of monthly alerts, how were they being handled, what was the performance around high severity incidents. You don't find all that. We don't get all that information, so which means that there was some performance, but was there a SLA? Was there a clear cut way of measuring it? No, there wasn't. So that is very clearly something which is those are the drivers which are going to take it advantage.
Yeah. So another very interesting thought that just crisscrossed my mind by while you were talking about the on one side we talk about the that is related. We talk about the how widespread the whole um, threat surface has become. And why has it become so widespread? Because of the distributed nature of enterprise, because of application of multiple technologies. I mean, we are talking about hybrid cloud, we're talking about multi-cloud environments, we're talking about edge devices, we're talking about mobile security, we're talking about application security. I mean, so many things actually getting added into an enterprise to run business. Now, can cyber security keep pace with this kind of dynamic environment? And especially in the context of when cyber security is managed in-house, is it possible for a CIO's or a CISO's organization to keep pace with this, um, and not falter on anything? And that is where the concept of a managed security service provider comes in. Um, there may be some trade-offs while having security in-house or while having a SOC in-house versus subscribing it as a service, or using it as a service model through an MSSP. So, where does the industry stand today in terms of wholesomeness of their cybersecurity programs and an effective way that they can engage with an MSSP without bothering too much about what technology to deploy, technology obsolescence, complexity of different technologies coming into the environment, and so on.
True. So, you know, if you look at this, there is a recent example comes to mind when you were talking about enterprise versus what an MSSP can render and can achieve, help the enterprise achieve. We had close interactions with one of the topmost banks in our country, and looking at their team, the structure, it was clear that the kind of team that we know that a large bank has to have mature security model. That's the only way they can protect themselves against the cyber criminals and the fraudsters, etc. They had a team which was probably larger than a typical niche MSSP or one of the smaller MSSP, the internal security team. Yeah. So that tells us that there are enterprises which are very much, there's a broad spectrum of enterprises in terms of what kind of program are they running, or what kind of team do they have, and how stable is their environment, etc. Right? But now, if we start comparing this with the fact that yes, there could be that, I would say is clearly an exception. It's at the top end of the spectrum in terms of that kind of enterprise and organization, and there are certain reasons for that which we will discuss. But by definition, right, I think the first thing is just the approach towards managed services adoption is the fact that there are some clear differences that one can examine across the classical triad of your people, process, technology. Right?
Yep.
So the minute one starts thinking of that, those kind of differences start surfacing and start emerging, right? That all right. So what are we talking about in terms of the technology deployment, right? Now, while you rightfully mentioned, Rahul, that the concerns of, let's say, technology obsolescence or some of those deficiencies can be taken away, but the concern from the enterprise side is that, is it really taken away, or is it just being hidden from the view, and it's still there on the MSSP side, right? So therefore, there is what we feel is that, let's say, on the technology side in the PPT triad, there is some level of customers need some level of transparency and governance, and we understand that, right? So the way we provide that is, the fact that there's a POC, or what is being called a POV, proof of value, etc., where the customers see the technology at work, right? So it's not that fine, it's my service. Here are some sample reports. Take it. It's not that the technology, the way it works, with in the sample integration with the customer environment is something that we show. So that's on the technologies part of it. Secondly, there are times when the customers also would like to retain some level of user self-service, whereby they also get to do certain things on the platform. So that also gives them confidence that okay, I kind of know what's going on. There are certain updates in configuration that I can look at, certain reports that I can fetch for myself, etc., etc. Right? So they're not like completely outside the the whole technology stack or platform, but they have some level of some interface and some access to that, which is helping them stay on top of that. Let's talk about now uh, the people part of it.
Yep.
People is something where there's an obvious shift between traditional versus managed services approach, but customers always like to keep some kind of an anchor point within their, not always, but many times like to keep an anchor point within their enterprise through at least a small layer of resources that they are very directly interacting with, and it's not like your remote services model, right? So that creates for them that window into an MSSP operations, whereby they through a normal regular interaction, the way you would have it within internal teams, you are able to access information, talk about certain services, get better clarity around challenges. If something does break down, an RCA note that comes over the email, and then somebody give you some explanation from Ireland could be very different from having somebody on the ground who handle the issue for you, and then later on, there was an explanation also in terms of what was the actual cause, why was there a breakdown if that was so, and handling that. So then there's the people element also, that needs to be thought of, and then there's the process and operations element as well, right?
Right.
So from process and operations standpoint, I think that this is usually a hidden struggle for the enterprise. They many times they would lack the process, and they would sometimes pay some consultant. Sometimes an auditor would come and would paint a report red, and that would then trigger the enterprise to go and fix some of their processes issues and all of that, right? But this can be a soft spot, a vulnerable spot for enterprises. And but definitely when they buy an MSSP, it's an important part of the contract construct itself can be taken out. So that is something that is very important. And then certain byproducts and benefits that you can get out of that is the fact that certification to information security standards, right? It would
Yep.
take X amount of money for your enterprise to go ahead and achieve an ISO certification or achieve some PCI DSS compliance, etc. All of that. The same thing, if you go with a service provider, is something that you would expect a service provider to have, but that's something which is beneficial to you also, because in turn that applies to your security operations as well, because it is being carried out by a certified MSSP. So we see some kind of some of those things also coming in. So that is where I think the modeling around the let's say the PPT and plus operations and that triad can this thing really come up. And also tying back to the previous point or the question that we had just discussed was the fact that if a large part of the customer's IT stack is being consumed also as a service or a managed service, if you will, right, whatever,
Yes.
then naturally, some part of the security is anyway coming as part of your subscription today, because there are some things that you get as a benefit as part of your, let's say, cloud subscription, right? There are certain things which come across from there. That is something that anyway needs to be managed. So, there are needs for managed services around that as well, and you would want to have an expert partner who would be able to do that. So that was also a factor that kind of ties into this. The one or two of the typical major trade-offs that or the challenges that on the customer side, thinking of it from their perspective, would be, of course, compliance needs, would be around where is my data moving, what's happening with that, etc. Right? So that is something that definitely customers will have some questions and concerns around, right? And sometimes customers have practical concerns also around MSSPs as to what's on your side, Mr. MSSP, and what's on my side. Please be very clear,
Yeah,
because
yeah.
what they don't like is being caught unawares later on that, oh, that was a responsibility area that was with the customer, they weren't prepared for it, and suddenly the MSSP said, listen, I've done my bit, this is your team was supposed to do this. So getting clearer expectations, getting the RACI model in place and all that, because it is for sure that when you buy a managed service, does that mean that it's completely it's like security completely outsourced? That is usually not the case. Even if you get even the CISO office occupied through that service approach, even then it can't be the case. So I would say those are really the that's the construct of the situation that one needs to examine, and that's how one arrives at MSSP adoption.
So if I ask you, I mean, that's a real life conversation that I've had with the CIO, not with the
Mhm.
CISO. The
Mhm.
CIO who's responsible for information security of a decently large organization. Now, the comment that came from the CIO was that while I am happy to engage with an MSSP and that's the way forward, but can I get some kind of assurance from the service provider that there will be a reduction in incidents, for example? So, as an MSSP or as a champion working in a managed security service provisioning organization, do you think this is possible for an MSSP to promise?
So that again, firstly, it's like both of us are looking at the same problem. So that part is understood. Okay, but it's like saying that can the Indian team play better versus can the Indian team win every game? You understand what I'm saying? right?
Yeah.
So the way we approach it is, can we play better? Are we measuring it? Can we see that versus are we winning every time? And are the attackers losing every time? So that's where, for and it's absolutely evident that that is where you get into the realm of this is a very sensitive area. We understand that cybersecurity is very important as part of the enterprise risk management, but at the same time, consequential damages is not something that service provider business is about. So it's not about being able to underwrite and support the potential impact to an organization in case an incident it does happen. So therefore, bringing in that level of measurability. So let's say to give that CIO the confidence, the CIO, the example that you gave us, that indeed are the incidents getting either addressed better, are some of the known categories of incidents really reducing, this, because we can't have the same type of noise again and again. It doesn't make sense. The
Absolutely.
controls can't be failing every time. Maybe it was missing the first time. And once your controls are there, then second time, maybe people found a workaround. The third time, it has to be robust and it has to be able to handle that. So how does one measure that? How does one weed out those kind of problem areas and show that that improvement and benefit is something that I think is crucial to the success of a program, and that is something that is equally an area that we take head on.
Okay.
However, when it comes down to the fact that, okay, so you told me that you got a great solution, so what's your assurance that nothing will happen, right? So that's getting to the end game, saying that what's your assurance that you'll win every game, right? That's not something that even Roger Federer or Rafael Nadal is going to tell you. So it doesn't work that way. Nor do their coaches tell them to go and win every game. So, so that's where it's all about getting the process right. So we look at getting the process right. We look at engaging with customers on that, and being able to link better to KPIs. The thinking around what kind of KPIs should security as an enabler present back to the organization. That how was employee productivity positively also influence and this thing, because of the fact that a typical type of outage issues from basic things like password reset. Oh, I lost it, I did this, I did that, and you're struggling for hours and all of that, to other things like, of course, system lockout, ransomware, and a variety of other things. So then when you start looking at just that part of it, you realize that okay, uh, why did I invest in an EDR solution? I can see it. I can see it, with the fact that indeed when one user carried an infection, we didn't let it go on from there, and we were able to kind of stop it right there. Otherwise, with my traditional stuff, it would have been all over the place before I knew it. So those are, I think things that which are important. Customer want to understand the context. They want to understand that, okay, if we did this, then in my operating environment, what is it that really changed? What is that really improved, right? Beyond just a technical ticket count. So that's definitely something that we focus on, and when we are able to, we look at relating that more and more to the customer environment.
Also, I'm just asking you a very hypothetical, I'm painting a hypothetical situation here. So when you are negotiating with an organization, do you also bring them to a level of maturity to understand the entire threat landscape that is surrounding them? Or do you think that their level of maturity is enough to start direct negotiation on the services?
Yeah, I think setting the baseline is a very crucial element indeed. It's a slightly painful process also. I'll be very candid over here. Okay, because sometimes it can open certain can of worms, which which can be difficult for some stakeholders in the organization. But still, one has to go about setting the baseline in a reasonable manner, so that the organization understands kind of what is the starting point of that whole journey, right? So that's just one part of it. So that the improvement, the execution is something which then is easier for the customers to absorb, and take on. That is point number one. The other thing is, yes, it also leads to goal setting. Therefore, right, that okay, what are the areas that we are clearly looking at improving by examining the organization's current state and not just rushing into a managed services system. That is there kind of a certain a goal line that we are looking at? In the previous question that you asked, also we spoke about kind of examples where we could tie to that. So there should be reasonable agreement to that. Maybe the organization already has a overarching cybersecurity enhancement strategy. Maybe they don't, and the MSSP needs to add their inputs to that. Sometimes it could the conversation leads to a full-blown cyber maturity assessment also.
Yep.
Okay, that's what we need. But we would want to take a step back and really look at that, right? And that is something that they might not want their MSSP to do, which is fine with us. And sometimes they're okay with us to provide them that. So we would do that as well. So that's another aspect that I would say is part of the journey. And the one more aspect that I would say is sometimes the customers would want to also understand, and I see that okay, you're saying that I'm going to deploy this kind of a solution for you with with let's say the security alarm threshold set at this level, or these are the focus use cases and all that. But why are you doing that? So you have to then again show it on the basis of certain understanding of the norms of, let's say, user behavior, what's happening within their environment, to say that this is where we can start, because anything above this threshold is something that we want to examine as an alarm, right? And then we could always look at changing that threshold also. So many times the customer says that if you just for the sake of it, you put kind of a black box there saying that here is my SOC monitoring and analytics solution, but if that's not smart enough, then how do I know it is catching all the attacks or not and all that, right? So that kind of a more granular discussion with customers around the use cases and all of that needs to happen. All of these things is what feeds into then what the customer would feel more confident about. So doing some activity around that of what you asked, that don't just slap that solution on, but look at what kind of assessment level setting baselining with the customer is important. But the format and the method in which it is done, we see clearly it varies. Customers have their own ways of it.
Great. So coming to one last point, after having this wonderful conversation for almost about an hour, coming to the conclusive kind of question, businesses are now stretching to enable security to a very holistic framework, as we have been discussing about, which covers the capabilities around visibility, around detection, response, compliance. All of those, are becoming an integral part of the overall framework, or if we may say so, the changed framework. So, what capabilities does Tata Communications offer, which covers a large gamut of these? What are the various platforms that you offer to cover these aspects for your customers?
Right. Firstly, thanks for asking this question. Rahul, wink, wink.
I kept it for the last.
But no, the reality is that how do we really serve the market? And it's important that see, if we just examine, and there have been, of course, these interesting reports that that's in a way it's good news, right? In cybersecurity, we don't lack for reports now. There's so many different reports which talk about one slice of what's happening, or where the impact is and all that, from well respected reports like the DBIR, down to various others. And we also did our own report on digital transformation and why security is a key enabler there. So, but we're looking at what one gleans from those reports is where what we are seeing is that some of the important aspects for customers are around, they are not very confident about their ability around management still, right? That if an attack really happens, we spoke about the expanded attack surface, we spoke about other challenges that are there. So therefore, that's one of the key drivers that will continue to be there, right? In terms of how are they go into how is an enterprise or any business or any organization going to manage their threats more effectively, right? That's point number one. Point number two is, interestingly, and that will would kind of tie into the MSSP narrative, I believe, is the fact that optimization of resources is also important for organizations today. You can't just spray and pray, and having a big sprawl of tools and technologies doesn't help, right? Making more focused efforts, and being able to get the right collaboration going between the security teams and other teams is important. So
Yes.
the optimization of resources in the context of cybersecurity life cycle is also something that we see organizations look for. And some other strategic elements include like supply chain risk management, etc. Because of the fact that that threat really reared its head up, right? With two, three, big issues coming around that, and big attack vectors being reported around, right? So, and all organizations are dependent on some kind of the supply chain, whether on the software or on managed services or on a variety of other technology
That is
elements.
true. That is true.
So this is where it drives us towards the thinking of what is Tata contributing. So we are committed to the fact that managed security services is the core part of how we approach, or a core philosophy based on which how we approach the cybersecurity market. What that means is, there has been a steady and sequential buildup of platforms that can support these managed services for our customers, and these platforms are an encapsulation of the PPT triad that I spoke about earlier, which incorporate the right kind of technology functionality with the people and operations around that, and of course, the process part of it as well, and making it multi-tenanted, which then gives it scalability also, supported through the right kind of certifications, etc. We were talking about. So that has been a very important part. These platforms obviously are built on the internet and on the cloud by us, because that's how we provide our services, and that's how we are known also, especially in India as largest ISP, major CSP, etc. So therefore, what are we looking at? We spoke about the cloud migration, cloud option. So what we are looking at is really the model of connected security that we offer to our customers from the cloud to the edge. Meaning that we know that the customer's environment, as it is changing, and there could be remnants in the data center, absolutely fine, within the enterprise perimeter. But otherwise, it is about connecting your security across these different environments, or from the cloud to the edge, all the way to a perimeter edge. And that is stacked up in the areas which I said where the customers are feeling challenges. So let's say advanced network security is one core area of play for us. Obviously, because we are one of the largest network and ISPs in the globe. So we know that the network as a layer of defense is extremely crucial.
That is true.
So it can be the first line of defense also. So how to look at advanced network security, where firewall, sandboxing, unified threat management, DLP, etc., can all move to the cloud and cannot be on the internet. So that's something that we are looking at. The convergence trends around overlay solutions like software defined WAN with security is a big area of focus for us, etc. We are steadily increasing our own nodes in terms of capacity for managing attacks, whether it be DDoS attacks, providing better secure internet and secure web gateway capabilities for internet security. So we are doing that on advanced network security. Threat management, which, as I said, is a major challenge that enterprises face, is something which needs that full life cycle of capabilities. And where I spoke about analytics in the beginning of our talk, that there is clearly a preference and customers have an attraction towards analytics because of the fact that that can support your detection and response much better than your standard monitoring, log monitoring functions. So full stack around threat management and supported through some critical enablers like EDR, etc., is something that is another stack. Cloud security is very important area for us, because that's so much of a framework driven approach. It cannot be specific point solutions, because we're talking about multi-cloud, we're talking about so much of complexity. So it's a framework driven approach, where how to apply the right kind of shared security model to which cloud environment, and how to interoperate between the CSP, between ourselves, and between the customer, is something that we work on. This is also complemented by our services around risk and compliance. We spoke about cyber maturity assessment, baselining the customers, helping them on their journey. And of course, bespoke solutions also, because we cannot ignore the fact that there are brownfield environments, customers can't change their environments and rip and replace overnight. So how do we, create specific solutions for customers as well around their platforms to cater to their needs and then take it on from there. So that's broadly our philosophy and our approach as to how we are really working with our customers and tying it to some of the important goals and drivers for them.
Great. Thank you so much for this exciting and very interesting conversation, Avinash. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I wish I could have you for some more time, but it's a weekend. I will not prevent you from in letting yourself loose. But having said that, we have established certain facts which the industry should ponder upon. That given the complexity of the business, the growing complexity of business, I think it is imperative, it is imminent to give a very serious thought to cybersecurity, to reimagine the framework, to rechristen the whole, approach that organizations take. So with that, I would like to draw curtains for this conversation. Thank you very much for your valuable time, Avinash. We really enjoyed it.
Likewise, and indeed, it was a very, very good conversation, and I hope that the audience also finds some benefit and get some insight.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Have a great day and a good weekend.
Thank you.